To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, we'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation of Trust. Christopher Graham sat in the first-class cabin of Flight 447, staring out at the clouds 30,000 feet below. At 42, he commanded respect in every room he entered. His construction empire, Graham Industries, had built half the skyscrapers in Chicago. More importantly, Christopher had built his reputation on two unshakable principles. Loyalty earned loyalty, and betrayal earned destruction. The flight attendant offered him another whiskey, but Christopher declined. He needed a clear head for tomorrow's board meeting. The Henderson Project, a $200 million downtown development, would cement his company's dominance for the next decade. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife, Ashley. "Miss you already. Kids can't wait for you to get home. Safe travels, love." Christopher smiled, a rare softness crossing his weathered features. 15 years of marriage to Ashley Graham had given him two children, 16-year-old Brandon and 14-year-old Rachel. Ashley, at 38, still turned heads with her auburn hair and green eyes. She'd been his anchor through the brutal early years of building his empire. His brother Martin had often joked that Christopher was two different men, the ruthless businessman who crushed competitors without a second thought, and the devoted family man who coached Little League and never missed a school play. Christopher preferred it that way. Family was sacred territory, untouchable and pure. The plane descended toward O'Hare as Christopher mentally prepared for his homecoming. He'd been in Dallas for 3 weeks, finalizing contracts that would make Graham Industries untouchable. Ashley had managed everything perfectly in his absence. The kids' schedules, his social obligations, even preliminary meetings with potential investors. As they landed, Christopher felt the familiar satisfaction of returning to his domain. Chicago was his city, and the Graham family was his fortress. Nothing could touch what he'd built here. His phone rang as he collected his luggage. Martin's name flashed on the screen. "Welcome back, brother." Martin's voice carried an odd tension. "How was Dallas?" "Productive. Henderson deal is locked up tight." Christopher adjusted his tie as he walked toward the parking garage. "Everything good here?" A pause. "We need to talk. In person." Christopher frowned. Martin Graham ran security for Graham Industries and had been Christopher's closest confidant since childhood. Martin never sounded uncertain. "What's wrong?" "Not over the phone." "Are you heading home?" "Of course. Ashley's making her famous lasagna, and the kids have been texting me all week about some project they want to show me." Another pause, longer this time. "Christopher, don't go home tonight." Christopher stopped walking. A businessman parking his BMW nearby glanced over at the sudden stillness in Christopher's posture. "What did you say?" "Just trust me and stay away. Come to my place instead. We need to talk." The line went dead. Christopher stared at his phone, his mind racing. In 40 years, Martin had never steered him wrong. During the early days of the company, Martin had been the one to discover that their first partner was embezzling funds. When a rival company had tried to sabotage a major project, Martin had uncovered the plot. Christopher's success was built on Martin's unwavering loyalty and sharp instincts. But this request made no sense. Christopher's family was waiting for him. He had responsibilities, expectations to fulfill. Ashley would be hurt if he didn't come home after 3 weeks away. Yet something in Martin's voice triggered Christopher's deepest survival instincts. The same instincts that had helped him claw his way up from a working-class background to become one of Chicago's most powerful men. 40 minutes later, Christopher stood on Martin's doorstep in Lincoln Park. Martin's face was grim as he opened the door, his usually neat appearance disheveled. At 39, Martin shared Christopher's build and dark hair, but where Christopher commanded rooms with presence, Martin preferred shadows and observation. "Before you say anything," Martin said, leading Christopher into his living room, "you need to see this." Martin's coffee table held a laptop, several printed photographs, and what appeared to be surveillance equipment. Christopher's blood chilled as he recognized the familiar setup from their corporate investigations. "Martin, what the hell is going on?" "Sit down, Christopher. Please." Christopher remained standing, his hands clenched into fists. "My family is expecting me." "Your family?" Martin's voice cracked slightly. "That's what we need to discuss." Martin opened the laptop and turned it toward Christopher. The screen showed a frozen video frame. The interior of Christopher's home office, the room where he conducted his most sensitive business calls. I installed these cameras 3 months ago, Martin said quietly, after I noticed some irregularities in your business communications. Someone was leaking information about your deals, your strategies. I thought it might be corporate espionage. Christopher's jaw tightened. What did you find? Martin clicked play. The video showed Ashley entering the office, followed by a man Christopher didn't recognize, tall, blonde, well-dressed. Ashley was laughing, her hand on the stranger's arm in a gesture too intimate for business. That's Andre Travis, Martin said, real estate developer from Seattle. He's been in town for 6 months, supposedly scouting investment opportunities. Christopher watched in frozen silence as Ashley and Andre embraced passionately in his office, then moved to his desk. Andre sat in Christopher's chair while Ashley perched on the desk's edge, her legs draped over Andre's lap. Fast forward to last week, Martin said, clicking to another video file. This time, the office scene included 2 additional figures that made Christopher's blood turn to ice. Brandon and Rachel, his children, sitting across from Ashley and Andre like participants in a business meeting. Your kids are, Martin whispered, his voice filled with disgust. They're helping them, Christopher. Brandon's been copying your private files, photographing documents. Rachel's been reporting your phone calls, your meeting schedules. Christopher sank into Martin's leather chair, his world tilting off its axis. On the screen, he watched his son hand a stack of papers to Andre, while Ashley smiled approvingly. Rachel was showing Andre something on her phone, pointing and explaining animatedly. There's more, Martin said, his voice barely audible. Audio recordings. Financial transfers. They're not just stealing information. They're actively sabotaging your deals and selling the intelligence to Andre's investment group. Christopher's vision blurred with rage, so pure it felt like physical pain. The 3 people he'd trusted most in the world, his wife and his children, had betrayed him in the most fundamental way possible. They hadn't just broken his heart. They'd declared war on everything he'd built. When Christopher finally spoke, his voice was calm and deadly quiet. How long? Best I can tell. About 8 months. It started small. Ashley just sharing general information about your schedule, your mood, your business concerns. But it escalated quickly once Andre arrived. Christopher stood and walked to Martin's window, staring out at the Chicago skyline he'd helped shape. Each light represented a building, a deal, a victory earned through blood and determination. And his own family had been systematically undermining it all. What else do you know about Andre Travis? Plenty. I've been investigating him for weeks. Martin handed Christopher a thick folder. He's not just some random developer. His family has old money, Seattle shipping fortune. He's been specifically targeting you, Christopher. This isn't opportunistic. It's personal. Christopher opened the folder, scanning the documents inside. Andre Travis, 35, Harvard MBA, inherited a struggling family business and turned it into a West Coast real estate empire. But the more recent information caught Christopher's attention. Andre had been quietly acquiring properties in Chicago, building a portfolio that would directly compete with Graham Industries. He's planning to go public with a new venture next year, Martin continued. A Chicago-based development company. With the inside information from Ashley and the kids, he'll be able to undercut your bids, steal your clients, anticipate your strategies. Christopher closed the folder and turned to face his brother. You said there were audio recordings. Martin hesitated. Christopher, some of this it's going to hurt. I'm already hurt, Martin. Show me everything. Martin clicked on an audio file. Ashley's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. Christopher thinks he's so untouchable, so smart. But he tells me everything. Every vulnerability, every weakness, every fear. He has no idea that his own children see him as a tyrant who controls their lives with money. Andre's voice responded. And they're willing to help us take him down? Brandon hates him for sending him to military school. Rachel resents him for controlling her social life. They both know they'll inherit millions when they turn 18, but they want freedom now. I've convinced them that helping us will give them the independence they crave. Christopher's hands began to shake as his wife's laughter echoed through the speakers. The beautiful thing is that Christopher will never suspect his precious family. He built his whole identity around being the provider, the protector. When we destroy him, it won't just be his business that falls, it'll be his soul. Martin stopped the recording. The silence stretched between the brothers like a chasm. When Christopher finally spoke, his voice had changed completely. Gone was any trace of the loving husband and father. What remained was the voice that had crushed business rivals and destroyed anyone who dared challenge him. Martin, I need you to do something for me. Anything. I need you to help me teach them that betrayal has consequences. All of them. Martin nodded slowly. What do you want me to do? Christopher walked back to the window, his reflection overlaying the city lights like a ghost haunting his own empire. I want you to help me show them what happens when you declare war on Christopher Graham. Chapter 2. The Architecture of Revenge. Christopher didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat in Martin's study, surrounded by evidence of his family's betrayal, methodically planning their destruction. By dawn, he had filled 3 legal pads with notes, strategies, and contingencies. You look like hell, Martin said, entering with coffee and breakfast. I feel reborn, Christopher replied, his voice eerily calm. For the first time in months, everything makes sense. Ashley's sudden interest in my business meetings. The kids' new attitudes, their requests for more independence. Even Andre's convenient arrival in Chicago, it was all orchestrated. Martin set down the coffee and studied his brother's face. Christopher's eyes held a coldness that Martin hadn't seen since their father's funeral 20 years ago, when Christopher had sworn to destroy the loan sharks who had driven their father to suicide. What's the plan? Christopher stood and walked to Martin's whiteboard, where he'd been sketching diagrams throughout the night. Phase 1. Gathering intelligence. I need to know everything about Andre Travis, his weaknesses, his fears, his pressure points. I need to understand exactly what they've taken from me and what they're planning to do with it. Already on it. I've got contacts in Seattle running deep background checks. Financial records, personal relationships, business dealings, everything. Good. Phase 2. Establishing control. I'm going to let them think they're winning while I position all the pieces. Ashley and the kids need to believe I'm completely oblivious to their betrayal. Christopher drew a series of interconnected circles on the whiteboard, labeling them with names and relationships. Phase 3. The revelation. When I'm ready to move, I want them to understand exactly what they've done and exactly what it's going to cost them. Martin studied the diagram. And Phase 4. Christopher's smile was purely predatory. Phase 4 is where they learn that some lines should never be crossed. Over the next 3 days, Christopher played the role of the loving husband and father with Oscar-worthy precision. He returned home Sunday evening with gifts for everyone. A designer handbag for Ashley, the latest gaming system for Brandon, and professional art supplies for Rachel. Daddy. Rachel threw her arms around him, her performance equally convincing. We missed you so much. I missed you too, sweetheart, Christopher replied, hugging her tightly while mentally cataloging every detail of her deception. Ashley greeted him with a passionate kiss, her green eyes sparkling with manufactured affection. How was the Henderson meeting? Perfect. We're going to break ground next month. Christopher watched Ashley's face carefully, noting the slight tightening around her eyes. The project details are in my study. I'll need to review the contracts tomorrow. Of course, darling. I've been keeping everything organized for you. That night, Christopher lay beside Ashley in their king-sized bed, listening to her steady breathing while his mind worked through calculations and contingencies. She stirred once, her hand reaching across the sheets to touch his arm. I love you, Christopher, she murmured sleepily. I love you too, he whispered back, the lie tasting like poison on his tongue. Monday morning brought the first phase of Christopher's counterattack. While Ashley drove the kids to school and presumably continued her secret meetings with Andre, Christopher implemented security protocols that would have impressed the CIA. Every communication device in the house is now monitored, Martin reported from his surveillance bin parked 3 blocks away. Phone calls, text messages, emails, even their social media accounts. We'll know about their plans before they finalize them. What about Andre's background check? Interesting developments. Andre Travis isn't just some ambitious developer. He's got deep family connections to Seattle's political machine. His uncle is a federal judge, his cousin is a state senator. If this goes public, he could bring serious pressure to bear. Christopher felt his first genuine smile in days. Good. I was worried this might be too easy. There's something else. Andre's been married twice before. Both marriages ended badly. The first wife accused him of psychological manipulation, and the second wife filed a restraining order that was mysteriously dropped a week later. He has a pattern. Gets worse. I found evidence that he's done this before. Targeted successful businessmen by seducing their wives and turning their families against them. There's a paper trail leading back to San Francisco, Denver, and Phoenix. In each case, he walked away with insider information that helped him destroy his target's businesses. Christopher's jaw clenched. He's not just stealing my business intelligence. He's following a proven playbook. That's my assessment. Ashley and the kids aren't just betraying you. They're pawns in a much larger game. The revelation should have softened Christopher's anger, but instead, it crystallized his resolve. Ashley and his children had chosen to become weapons in Andre's hands. The fact that they were being manipulated didn't excuse their betrayal. It made it worse. That evening, Christopher gathered his family in the living room for what he announced as a state of the family meeting. I know I've been traveling a lot lately, he began, studying each of their faces. I want to make sure we're all connected, all working toward the same goals. Brandon shifted uncomfortably on the couch. What kind of goals, Dad? Well, for starters, I want to understand what you kids are planning for your futures. Brandon, you're 16 now. Are you thinking about college? Brandon exchanged a quick glance with Ashley before answering. I've been looking at some schools. Maybe something in California. California's expensive, but we can afford it. Christopher turned to Rachel. And you, sweetheart? Any thoughts about what you want to do? I'm only 14, Daddy. I don't need to decide yet. Of course not. But it's never too early to start planning. Christopher leaned forward, his voice warm and paternal. I just want you both to know that whatever you decide, whatever you want to pursue, I'm here to support you. Family comes first, always. Ashley reached over and squeezed Christopher's hand. That's why we love you so much. Christopher squeezed back, noting the slight tremor in Ashley's fingers. I love you all too. More than you'll ever know. Later that night, Christopher reviewed the day's surveillance footage on his laptop. The family meeting had clearly unsettled them. Within an hour of his announcement, Ashley had called Andre, and both kids had sent urgent text messages to numbers that Martin was still tracing. The audio from Ashley's call was particularly revealing. He's acting strange, Andre. Too friendly, too interested in the kids' plans. What if he knows something? Andre's voice was calm and reassuring. He doesn't know anything. If he did, he would have confronted you already. Christopher Graham isn't subtle when he's angry. But what if? Ashley, trust me. I've done this before. Men like Christopher are so arrogant, so confident in their control, that they can't imagine their own families betraying them. He's probably just feeling guilty about traveling so much. Christopher paused the recording and smiled. Andre was right about one thing. Christopher wasn't subtle when he was angry. But Andre had made a critical error in assuming that Christopher's lack of immediate confrontation meant ignorance rather than strategy. The next morning brought phase 2 of Christopher's plan. He called his assistant, Francisca Weaver, and dictated a series of instructions that would have seemed routine to anyone not aware of the larger game being played. Francisca, I need you to schedule a dinner party for this Saturday. Small group, maybe 8 people. I want to invite some potential investors for the Henderson project. Of course, Mr. Graham. Any specific guests in mind? Actually, yes. I want you to reach out to Andre Travis. He's been expressing interest in Chicago development opportunities, and I think it's time we met formally. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. Sir, I don't have contact information for Mr. Travis. That's okay. I'm sure Ashley can provide it. She mentioned meeting him at some social function. Christopher hung up and immediately called Martin. It's time for phase 2. I'm bringing Andre into my house. Are you insane? Why would you? Because I want to see his face when he realizes he's been invited to dinner by the man whose family he's been manipulating. I want to watch him squirm while he pretends to be a stranger to my wife and children. And if he doesn't take the bait, he'll take it. Men like Andre can't resist the opportunity to gloat. He'll want to see the family he's corrupted up close. It feeds his ego. Christopher was right. Within 2 hours, Ashley called to inform him that she'd coincidentally run into Andre Travis at the coffee shop and had taken the liberty of inviting him to Saturday's dinner. He seems very interested in your work, darling. I think you'll like him. I'm sure I will, Christopher replied. I'm looking forward to getting to know him better. Chapter 3. The Perfect Host. Saturday evening arrived with the crisp clarity of October in Chicago. Christopher adjusted his tie in the hall mirror, noting the slight tremor in his hands, not from nerves, but from anticipation. Tonight, he would look into the eyes of the man who had orchestrated his family's betrayal. Ashley descended the stairs in a black cocktail dress that Christopher had bought her for their anniversary 2 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on him that she'd chosen to wear his gift while entertaining her lover. "You look beautiful," he said, meaning it despite everything. Ashley had always been stunning, and betrayal hadn't diminished her physical appeal. "Thank you, darling. The caterers finished setting up an hour ago. Everything looks perfect." Christopher nodded, surveying the dining room where Ashley had arranged flowers and candles with her usual impeccable taste. She'd always been gifted at creating beautiful facades. Brandon and Rachel appeared from the kitchen, both dressed appropriately for a family dinner with business associates. Christopher noted the nervous energy radiating from both of them. "Remember," Christopher said, addressing his children, "tonight is about business. I expect you both to be polite and engaged. Mr. Travis might have opportunities that could benefit our family." The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. Christopher opened it himself, coming face to face with Andre Travis for the first time. The man was everything Martin's surveillance had suggested. Tall, confident, expensively dressed, with the kind of smooth handsomeness that attracted both investors and married women. "Mr. Graham," Andre extended his hand with a perfect smile. "Thank you so much for the invitation. I've been looking forward to meeting Chicago's most successful developer." Christopher shook Andre's hand, applying just enough pressure to be memorable without being obvious. "Please, call me Christopher. Any friend of Ashley's is welcome in our home." Christopher watched Andre's eyes carefully, noting the micro-expression of surprise that flashed across his features. Andre had expected Christopher to be suspicious or territorial. Instead, he was faced with warmth and hospitality from the man he was systematically destroying. "Ashley, darling," Christopher called out. "Our guest has arrived." Ashley appeared from the living room, her performance flawless as she greeted Andre with the polite distance appropriate for a recent acquaintance. "Mr. Travis, welcome to our home. Mrs. Graham, thank you again for the invitation. Your home is even more beautiful than you described." Christopher noted the subtle familiarity in Andre's voice, the tone of a man who had indeed heard detailed descriptions of the house from someone who lived there. The other guests arrived within minutes. William Fry, Christopher's banker, Kent Sanderson, a city planning official, and Rich Johnston, a fellow developer who Christopher occasionally collaborated with on large projects. Christopher had chosen each guest carefully, men who would provide the perfect backdrop for the evening's real drama. During cocktails, Christopher positioned himself to observe the interactions between Andre and his family. Ashley maintained perfect distance, speaking to Andre no more than any other guest. But Christopher caught the slight touches, her hand brushing Andre's as she passed him a drink, the way she angled her body toward him during group conversations. Brandon and Rachel were less skilled at deception. Both teenagers seemed fascinated by Andre, asking him pointed questions about his business and his plans for Chicago development. To the other guests, it might have seemed like normal teenage curiosity. To Christopher, it looked like debriefing. "Mr. Travis," Rich Johnston was saying, "I understand you're looking at investment opportunities here in Chicago. What sectors interest you most?" Andre smiled, swirling his whiskey. "I'm particularly interested in downtown development. Mixed-use properties, luxury residential projects. The kind of work that Mr. Graham here has mastered." "Please," Christopher interjected, "tell us about your background. What brought you to Chicago?" Andre launched into what was clearly a well-rehearsed story about market opportunities and family connections. But Christopher was watching Ashley's face. She was listening with the intensity of someone hearing familiar information presented to strangers for the first time. "My uncle always said that Chicago had more potential than Seattle," Andre continued. "He encouraged me to establish a presence here, maybe partner with established firms to learn the local market." "Smart approach," William Fry agreed. "Christopher could probably give you excellent guidance. He knows this city better than anyone." "I would be honored to learn from Mr. Graham," Andre said, his eyes meeting Christopher's with what seemed like genuine respect. The dinner conversation flowed smoothly, with Andre displaying impressive knowledge of Chicago's development history and current market conditions. Christopher had to admit that the man was intelligent and well-prepared. Under different circumstances, he might have actually liked Andre Travis. As the evening progressed, Christopher began implementing subtle tests. He mentioned specific details about upcoming projects, noting which information seemed to surprise Andre and which didn't. He discussed his travel schedule for the coming weeks, watching for any unusual interest from his family. "I'll be traveling quite a bit over the next month," Christopher said during dessert. "Dallas, Phoenix, possibly a trip to Seattle to look at some properties there." Andre's fork paused halfway to his mouth, a tiny hesitation that Christopher caught, but the other guests missed. "Seattle has an excellent market," Andre said carefully. "If you'd like recommendations for areas to investigate, I'd be happy to help." "That's very generous. Maybe we could meet for coffee when I'm in town." "I'd like that very much." After the other guests left, Andre lingered, accepting Christopher's invitation for a final drink in the study. Ashley excused herself to oversee the cleanup, and the children disappeared to their rooms, leaving the two men alone. Christopher poured 2 glasses of 25-year-old scotch and handed one to Andre. "To new partnerships," he said, raising his glass. "To new opportunities," Andre replied. They sat in leather chairs facing each other, the room lit by the warm glow of Christopher's desk lamp. This was the same room where Andre had been secretly meeting with Ashley and the children, and Christopher wondered if the irony was as apparent to Andre as it was to him. "Your family seems very close," Andre said, testing the waters. "They're everything to me," Christopher replied honestly. "I've built all of this for them. Everything I've accomplished, every deal I've made, every building I've constructed, it's all about giving them the best possible life." Andre nodded thoughtfully. "That's admirable. Not every successful man prioritizes family the way you do." "Family is sacred," Christopher said, watching Andre's face carefully. "Loyalty is the foundation of everything I believe in. I could forgive almost any mistake, any failure, any weakness. But betrayal." Christopher let the word hang in the air like a threat. "Betrayal destroys trust," Andre agreed. "Once that's gone, it's almost impossible to rebuild." "I disagree," Christopher said quietly. "I don't think it's impossible to rebuild. I think it's pointless to rebuild. Some things, once broken, should stay broken." Andre finished his scotch and set down the glass. "Well, I should let you get some rest. Thank you again for a wonderful evening. I hope we can continue our conversation soon." Christopher walked Andre to the door, shaking hands one final time. "I'm sure we will. I have a feeling our paths are going to cross quite frequently." After Andre left, Christopher found Ashley in the kitchen, finishing the last of the cleanup. She looked up as he entered, her smile radiant. "That went well, don't you think? Mr. Travis seems very nice." "He's interesting," Christopher agreed. "Very knowledgeable about the local market. Almost like he's been studying it for months." Ashley's hand stilled on the dish towel. "Well, he's obviously done his research. That's what good businessmen do." "True." Christopher moved closer, wrapping his arms around Ashley's waist from behind. "I love you, you know." Ashley leaned back against him, her tension melting away. "I love you too." Christopher kissed the top of her head, inhaling the familiar scent of her shampoo, while his mind calculated the final steps of his revenge. Phase 2 was complete. Andre had taken the bait, and Christopher now had everything he needed to move to Phase 3. Over the next 2 weeks, Christopher's surveillance network captured increasingly desperate communications between Ashley, Andre, and the children. The dinner party had clearly unsettled them, and they were struggling to interpret Christopher's behavior. "He's definitely suspicious," Brandon said in one recorded phone call to Andre. "He keeps asking weird questions about our friends, our activities. Like he's fishing for information." "Stay calm," Andre's voice replied. "If he knew anything definitive, he would have acted by now. Your father isn't the type to play games." Christopher laughed out loud when he heard that particular recording. Andre Travis had built his entire strategy on a fundamental misunderstanding of his opponent. The final piece of Phase 2 came from Martin's contacts in Seattle. Andre's business empire, impressive as it appeared, was built on a foundation of debt and questionable partnerships. More importantly, Andre's previous victims had never fought back because he'd chosen his targets carefully. Men who valued their reputations more than revenge, who would quietly rebuild rather than publicly expose their humiliation. Andre Travis had never faced someone like Christopher Graham. "Are you ready for Phase 3? Martin asked during one of their morning meetings. Christopher looked out at the Chicago skyline, his expression calm and determined. More than ready. It's time to show them what happens when you betray the wrong family. What's the first move? Christopher turned back to his brother, his smile cold and predatory. We're going to give them exactly what they think they want. And then we're going to take it all away. Chapter 4. The Illusion of Victory. Christopher implemented Phase 3 with the precision of a master chess player moving toward checkmate. On a cold November morning, he called his family together for another meeting, this time with an announcement that would seem like a gift to the conspirators. I've been thinking about our conversation a few weeks ago, he began, settling into his favorite armchair while Ashley, Brandon, and Rachel arranged themselves on the couch. About family goals and supporting each other's dreams. Ashley leaned forward slightly, her interest genuine. What did you have in mind? I've decided to take a step back from day-to-day operations at Graham Industries. I want to spend more time with you all, maybe do some traveling together. Brandon's eyes widened. Really, Dad? You'd leave the company? Not leave permanently, but I'm considering promoting Martin to Chief Operating Officer and bringing in some outside expertise to help manage the expansion. Maybe even consider selling a controlling interest to the right partner. Christopher watched their faces carefully. Ashley was fighting to keep her expression neutral, but he could see the excitement building behind her eyes. Brandon and Rachel exchanged a quick glance that spoke volumes. That sounds wonderful, darling, Ashley said. You've worked so hard for so long. You deserve to enjoy the fruits of your labor. I'm glad you approve. In fact, I was hoping you might help me evaluate potential partners. You've always had good instincts about people. Ashley's breathing quickened almost imperceptibly. Of course. Do you have anyone in mind? Actually, I do. That Andre Travis fellow we met at dinner. He seems sharp, well-connected, and he understands the Chicago market. I was thinking of offering him a consulting position, maybe with an option to buy into the company if things work out. The silence that followed was electric. Christopher could practically hear the mental calculations racing through their minds. How quickly they could feed information to Andre, how much they could accelerate his infiltration of the company, how soon they could achieve their ultimate goal of destroying Christopher's empire. He did seem very knowledgeable, Ashley said carefully. But darling, shouldn't you be more cautious about bringing in outsiders? Christopher smiled at the beautiful irony of receiving advice about caution from his cheating wife. You're probably right, but I have a good feeling about Andre. There's something trustworthy about him. Over the next week, Christopher orchestrated a series of chance encounters with Andre, gradually building toward a formal business proposition. Each meeting was carefully staged, with Martin's surveillance team documenting every interaction while Christopher played the role of an increasingly trusting and naive businessman. Christopher, I have to say, I'm flattered by your confidence in me, Andre said during lunch at Chicago's most exclusive restaurant. But are you sure you want to move this quickly? We've only known each other for a few weeks. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts, Christopher replied, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. I've built my entire career on reading people, and I read you as someone I can work with. I appreciate that more than you know. But bringing in an outside partner is a major decision. Have you discussed this with your family? Christopher set down his knife and fork, meeting Andre's eyes directly. My family supports whatever makes me happy. Ashley thinks you're charming, and the kids are fascinated by your stories about Seattle. In fact, Ashley suggested I should move faster rather than slower. Andre's smile faltered for just a moment. She did. Ashley has excellent judgment about people. She said she could tell immediately that you were someone we could trust. That afternoon, Christopher's surveillance team captured Andre's emergency phone call to Ashley. He's moving too fast. This feels like a trap. Ashley's voice was sharp with excitement. It's not a trap. It's exactly what we wanted. He's handing you the company on a silver platter. But why now? Why so suddenly? Because I've been working on him for months, convincing him that he needs to slow down, that he needs help managing the business. The dinner party was the final push. Seeing you in our home, meeting you as a family friend, made you seem safe and trustworthy. And the kids, they've been perfect. All those conversations about wanting more independence, about feeling controlled by their father's expectations. He's finally listening. He thinks he's being a better parent by stepping back from work. Andre's laughter was audible through the recording. He has no idea that his own children have been feeding us information for months. None. Christopher Graham's greatest weakness is his certainty that his family loves him unconditionally. He can't imagine that we might have our own agenda. Christopher paused the recording and turned to Martin, who was watching from across the conference room. Are you getting all this? Every word. Full audio and video documentation of their conspiracy. This is enough to destroy them in court if you want to go that route. I don't want to go that route, Christopher said quietly. Courts are for people who believe in justice. I believe in consequences. 2 weeks later, Christopher signed Andre Travis to a consulting contract with Graham Industries, with the promise of partnership consideration after a 6-month trial period. The contract gave Andre access to company files, strategic planning sessions, and confidential client information, everything he would need to systematically undermine Christopher's business. To the outside world, it looked like a brilliant strategic move. Andre brought fresh perspectives and West Coast connections that opened new opportunities for Graham Industries. Several industry publications ran features on the partnership, praising Christopher's innovative approach to expansion. Behind the scenes, Christopher's surveillance network documented every theft, every betrayal, every secret communication between Andre and the Graham family. Andre was copying files, photographing documents, and recording confidential conversations. Ashley was providing him with detailed intelligence about Christopher's plans, schedules, and personal vulnerabilities. Brandon and Rachel were acting as scouts, reporting on their father's mood, his concerns, and his private conversations. What none of them realized was that Christopher was feeding them carefully crafted misinformation, false documents, misleading financial projections, and strategic plans designed to lead Andre into catastrophic business decisions. The beauty of it, Christopher explained to Martin during one of their evening strategy sessions, is that they think they're outsmarting me, so they're not questioning the information they're stealing. Andre is making business decisions based on financial data that will bankrupt him. What about the emotional toll? Martin asked, concern evident in his voice. Watching your own family betray you every day, how are you handling that? Christopher was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the city lights. The emotional toll was in the discovery, Martin. Learning that they could betray me, that they wanted to destroy me. Everything since then has just been logistics. And when this is over, when you've destroyed them all, when this is over, I'll be free. Free from the illusion that I had a family worth protecting. The first crack in the conspirators' confidence came in December, when Andre's attempts to steal Christopher's clients began backfiring spectacularly. Using the false information Christopher had fed him, Andre made presentations to potential investors that contained wildly inaccurate market projections and impossible timelines. Something's wrong, Andre told Ashley during a recorded phone call. The Henderson Project numbers don't match what I'm seeing in the market research. Either Christopher is incompetent, or the documents Brandon copied were wrong. That's impossible, Ashley replied. Brandon copied them directly from Christopher's private files. Maybe you're misreading the market. I don't misread markets, Ashley. This is what I do. Then maybe Christopher is making mistakes. He's been under a lot of stress lately, talking about stepping back from work. Maybe his judgment is slipping. Christopher smiled as he listened to the recording. Even faced with evidence that their intelligence was flawed, they couldn't imagine that he might be deliberately misleading them. Their arrogance would be their downfall. The second crack came when Andre's business decisions in Seattle began creating problems for his existing operations. Convinced by Christopher's false projections that the Chicago market was more profitable than it actually was, Andre had diverted resources from his West Coast properties to fund his Illinois expansion. The result was a cash flow crisis that forced him to take on dangerous levels of debt. He's starting to panic, Martin reported after reviewing the latest surveillance data. Andre's been making desperate phone calls to investors, trying to raise emergency capital. How long before his Seattle operation collapses? At the current rate? Maybe 6 weeks. But he'll probably figure out something's wrong before then. Christopher nodded thoughtfully. Then it's time for Phase 4. I want to be face to face with all of them when their world comes apart. What did you have in mind? Christopher's smile was cold and final. I'm going to invite them to a family Christmas party. All of them together, in my home, celebrating what they think is their victory. And then I'm going to show them the real meaning of Christmas, the gift of truth. Chapter 5, The Unraveling. Christmas week in Chicago brought the kind of bitter cold that cut through expensive coats and warmed hearts toward thoughts of home and family. Christopher had spent the morning reviewing the final elements of his plan with Martin, ensuring that every detail was perfect for the evening's revelation. The catering staff will be gone by 7, Martin confirmed, checking his watch. Our recording equipment is in place throughout the house, and the security team is positioned outside. And Andre? He confirmed this morning. Ashley told him it was just an intimate family gathering with a few close friends, the perfect opportunity for him to see how naturally he fits into your family circle. Christopher adjusted his cufflinks, a nervous habit from his early business days that resurged during moments of extreme stress. Tonight would end a chapter of his life that had lasted 15 years. After tonight, the Graham family as he had known it would cease to exist. The house looked spectacular, decorated with Ashley's usual impeccable taste. She had outdone herself this year. The tree sparkled with crystal ornaments and white lights. Garland draped the staircase, and the dining room gleamed with china and silver that had been wedding gifts from Christopher's grandmother. It was a perfect setting for the destruction of everything those decorations represented. Ashley appeared in a red silk dress that complemented her auburn hair beautifully. "How do I look?" she asked, spinning playfully. "Like a woman about to get everything she's been working toward," Christopher replied, meaning it in ways she couldn't imagine. Brandon and Rachel joined them in the living room, both teenagers dressed formally but fidgeting with nervous energy. Christopher noted their anxiety and wondered if they had any intuition about what was coming, or if they were simply excited about Andre's presence at their family gathering. "When will Mr. Travis arrive?" Rachel asked, trying to sound casual. "Any minute now," Ashley answered. "He's looking forward to spending Christmas Eve with us." The doorbell rang at exactly 8 o'clock. Christopher opened the door to find Andre standing on the doorstep with an expensive bottle of wine and a perfectly practiced smile. Behind that smile, Christopher could see the strain of a man whose carefully laid plans were beginning to crumble. "Christopher, thank you so much for including me tonight. I know how important family time is during the holidays." "Family is everything," Christopher agreed, stepping aside to let Andre enter. Come in. Ashley's made enough food for an army." Andre greeted the family with the warm familiarity of someone who had been part of their lives for much longer than the official timeline suggested. He hugged Ashley a moment too long, ruffled Brandon's hair like an uncle, and complimented Rachel's dress with the kind of attention that made her beam. Christopher watched these interactions with the detached interest of an anthropologist studying a primitive tribe. These people had been living in his house, eating his food, accepting his love and protection, while systematically planning his destruction. The cognitive dissonance was almost beautiful in its completeness. Dinner conversation flowed easily, with Andre regaling them with stories of Christmas traditions in Seattle and his plans for expanding his Chicago operations. Christopher noted how naturally Andre spoke about future plans, how confidently he assumed his position in their lives would continue. "I've been thinking about making Chicago my permanent base," Andre said, accepting a second glass of wine. "There's something about this city, this community, that feels like home." "We'd love that," Ashley said, her voice warm with genuine enthusiasm. "Wouldn't we, Christopher?" "Absolutely. It's always good to have trusted friends nearby." Brandon leaned forward eagerly. "Mr. Travis, tell Dad about that property development you mentioned. The one near the lake." Andre shot Brandon a sharp look, too quick for anyone except Christopher to catch. "Well, it's just a preliminary idea. Nothing concrete yet." "I'd love to hear about it," Christopher said encouragingly. "I'm always interested in new projects." Andre described a fictional development project that Christopher recognized as a combination of his own confidential plans, stolen and reassembled into something that sounded impressive but would never work in reality. Christopher nodded and asked thoughtful questions, playing the role of an intrigued potential partner. "It sounds ambitious," Christopher concluded. "The kind of project that requires complete trust between partners." "Trust is essential," Andre agreed. "Without it, partnerships fail." After dinner, Christopher suggested they move to the living room for coffee and dessert. The Christmas tree provided a warm, festive backdrop as Ashley served her famous chocolate torte and Brandon added logs to the fireplace. "This is perfect," Rachel said, curled up in her favorite chair with a cup of hot chocolate. "Having Mr. Travis here makes it feel like we have a complete family." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Christopher felt something cold and final settle in his chest as he looked at his daughter, his baby girl, whom he had taught to ride a bicycle and helped with homework and comforted through every childhood fear, casually expressing her wish to replace him with his enemy. Speaking of family, Christopher said, setting down his coffee cup with deliberate precision, I have an announcement to make. Ashley looked up with interest. Good news, I hope? That depends on your perspective. Christopher reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small recording device, placing it on the coffee table in front of them. I wanted to share some family memories with everyone. Andre's face went pale. Christopher, what? Please, let me finish. Christopher's voice carried an authority that silenced the room. You see, Andre, over the past few months, I've been collecting some very interesting audio recordings. Conversations between family members and close friends. I thought tonight would be the perfect time to share them. Christopher pressed play on the device. Ashley's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. Christopher thinks he's so untouchable, so smart. But he tells me everything. Every vulnerability, every weakness, every fear. Ashley's face went white as she heard her own words played back to her. Brandon and Rachel looked confused, not yet understanding the implications of what they were hearing. Andre's voice followed. And they're willing to help us take him down? Brandon hates him for sending him to military school. Rachel resents him for controlling her social life. They both know they'll inherit millions when they turn 18, but they want freedom now. Christopher watched his children's faces as understanding dawned. Brandon's mouth fell open in horror, while Rachel began to shake her head in denial. Dad, I never said. Shoo. Christopher raised a hand for silence. Let's listen to the whole thing. Ashley's laughter echoed through the speakers. The beautiful thing is that Christopher will never suspect his precious family. He built his whole identity around being the provider, the protector. When we destroy him, it won't just be his business that falls, it'll be his soul. Christopher stopped the recording and looked around the room. Ashley was frozen in her chair, her face a mask of panic and calculation. Andre was reaching for his coat, preparing to leave, but Christopher's next words stopped him. If you try to leave, Andre, I'll have you arrested before you reach the door. I have surveillance footage of you stealing confidential documents from my office. I have recordings of you conspiring to commit corporate espionage. I have evidence of you manipulating my minor children into criminal activity. Andre sank back into his chair, his confident facade crumbling. Christopher, I can explain. Explain? You've been manipulating my wife and children for 8 months. You've stolen my business plans, corrupted my family, and systematically worked to destroy everything I've built. What exactly would you like to explain? Christopher stood and walked to the mantelpiece, where family photos documented 15 years of what he had believed was genuine happiness. He turned back to face them, his voice calm and deadly quiet. Here's what's going to happen. Ashley, you're going to pack your things and leave this house tonight. You'll receive divorce papers in the morning, and you'll sign them without contest. You'll receive no alimony, no property settlement, and no access to our children. Ashley found her voice, her lawyer's training kicking in despite her shock. Christopher, you can't. The prenup has provisions. The prenup has adultery clauses that void every protection you thought you had. But even if it didn't, I have recordings of you conspiring to defraud my business. I have evidence of you using our children as accomplices in criminal activity. You'll be lucky if I don't have you prosecuted. Christopher turned to Andre, his eyes cold with contempt. As for you, Mr. Travis, you have 24 hours to liquidate your Chicago holdings and return to Seattle. If you're still in Illinois after that deadline, I'll destroy you so completely that you'll wish I had simply called the police. Andre straightened in his chair, some of his arrogance returning. You can't prove half of what you're claiming. And even if you could, I have resources you can't imagine. My family has connections. Christopher smiled, and the expression was so predatory that Andre's words died in his throat. Your family connections won't help you when your Seattle properties are foreclosed on next week. Did you really think I wouldn't investigate the financial foundation of your little empire? Andre's face went ashen. What are you talking about? Your entire operation is leveraged on debt secured by properties that I now own the mortgages to. Every desperate attempt you've made to raise capital in the past month has been funded by shell companies I control. I own you, Andre. Completely. That's impossible. Is it? Check your phone. I think you'll find some very interesting voicemails from your bankers. Andre fumbled for his phone with shaking hands. As he listened to his messages, his face crumpled in defeat. Christopher had spent the past month systematically acquiring Andre's debt and positioning himself to call it all in simultaneously. Now, Christopher continued, turning to his children, we come to the most difficult part of the evening. Brandon was crying now, his 16-year-old bravado completely gone. Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't understand what we were doing. Mom said it was just. Brandon. Christopher's voice cut through his son's pleading. Do you know what you've done? Do you understand the magnitude of your betrayal? Rachel was sobbing quietly, her face buried in her hands. Daddy, please. I love you. I didn't mean to hurt you. Christopher felt something break inside his chest as he looked at his children, the two people he had loved more than his own life, who had chosen to participate in his destruction. The rational part of his mind understood that they were teenagers, that they had been manipulated by adults they trusted. But the wounded part of his soul could only see betrayal. You chose, he said quietly. Both of you. When Andre and your mother offered you the chance to hurt me, you chose to take it. When they asked you to spy on me, to steal from me, to help them destroy me, you chose to do it. We didn't know, Rachel began. You knew enough. You knew you were betraying your father. You knew you were helping strangers hurt someone who loved you unconditionally. That was enough. Christopher walked back to his chair and sat down, suddenly feeling exhausted. Brandon, Rachel, you're both going to finish this school year, and then you're going to live with your grandmother in Phoenix. You'll have access to trust funds for college and basic living expenses, but you'll have no further contact with me. Dad, no. Brandon lunged forward, falling to his knees beside Christopher's chair. Please, I'll do anything. I'll make it up to you somehow. Christopher looked down at his son, the boy he had taught to throw a baseball, whose games he had never missed, who had once told him that he wanted to grow up to be just like his father. Some things can't be made up for, Brandon. Some choices can't be undone. Rachel was hyperventilating now, her sobs echoing through the room. This isn't fair. We're just kids. You can't abandon your own children. Christopher's voice was granite. You abandoned me first. Ashley finally found her courage, standing up with her hands clenched into fists. Christopher, you bastard, they're children. Whatever you think I've done, whatever you think Andre has done, punish us. Don't destroy your own family because of your wounded pride. Christopher laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. My wounded pride? Ashley, you've spent 8 months systematically destroying everything I cared about. You turned my children into spies and thieves. You invited my enemy into my home, into my bed, into my family. And you think this is about pride? I think this is about a man who can't forgive human weakness. No, Christopher said, standing to face her. This is about consequences. This is about what happens when you declare war on someone who loves you, and that someone decides to win. The room fell silent except for Rachel's muffled crying and the crackling of the fire. Christopher looked around at the destruction of his family, his wife exposed as an adulteress and co-conspirator, his business partner revealed as a fraud and manipulator, his children reduced to sobbing, broken teenagers who had learned too late that betrayal had a price. He felt no satisfaction in their pain, no joy in their defeat. He felt only the cold emptiness of a man who had lost everything worth protecting and gained the terrible freedom that comes with having nothing left to lose. The security team will escort Mr. Travis to his hotel, Christopher said, his voice returning to the businesslike tone that had made him a fortune. Ashley, you have until morning to pack your personal belongings. Martin will supervise to ensure you don't take anything that isn't legally yours. Christopher, Ashley said, her voice breaking, 15 years of marriage. 2 children. Doesn't any of that mean anything to you? Christopher walked to the window and looked out at the Chicago skyline. His city, his domain, his empire built on the foundation of what he had believed was an unshakable family. It meant everything to me, he said without turning around. That's why I can never forgive you for destroying it. Chapter 6. The Price of Betrayal. The aftermath of Christmas Eve unfolded with the methodical precision that characterized everything Christopher Graham did. By New Year's Day, the transformation was complete. Ashley was living in a downtown apartment under the terms of the most punitive divorce settlement in Cook County history. Andre Travis had fled to Seattle, where he was desperately trying to salvage his collapsing business empire. Brandon and Rachel were packing for their exile to Phoenix, their grandmother flying in to collect them like pieces of wreckage from a shipwreck. Christopher stood in his home office, surrounded by the machinery of his revenge. Box after box of legal documents, financial records, and surveillance equipment filled the room where his family's betrayal had first been planned. Martin worked quietly at a desk, finalizing the last details of Andre's destruction. The Seattle properties are officially in foreclosure as of this morning, Martin reported. Andre's been trying to negotiate with the banks, but they don't realize they're ultimately negotiating with you. And his family connections? Helpless. Turns out federal judges and state senators don't have much influence over private financial institutions. Andre's uncle tried to pressure some people, but there's nothing illegal about calling in legitimate debts. Christopher nodded, feeling a grim satisfaction at the completeness of Andre's downfall. The man who had manipulated Christopher's family was learning what it felt like to have his own foundation pulled out from under him. What about the children's trust funds? Established and funded. They'll have access to college expenses and reasonable living costs, but they can't touch the principal until they're 30. Even then, the terms specify that any contact with you or attempts to reconcile will void the entire inheritance. It was a cruel provision, Christopher knew, but necessary. Brandon and Rachel needed to understand that some betrayals were permanent, that some relationships couldn't be repaired with apologies and time. The house felt cavernous without his family's presence. Christopher had lived alone before, had built his empire as a single man driven by ambition and vision. But 15 years of marriage and fatherhood had changed him, filled spaces in his soul that now echoed with emptiness. He didn't miss Ashley. The woman he had thought he loved had been revealed as a fiction, a performance so convincing that even he had been fooled. What he missed was the illusion of having a partner, someone who shared his dreams and supported his ambitions. The children were harder. Intellectually, Christopher understood that Brandon and Rachel had been manipulated by adults they trusted. But emotionally, he couldn't separate their age from their choices. They had known right from wrong. They had known that betraying their father was wrong. And they had chosen to do it anyway. Sir, Francisco Weaver appeared in the doorway, carrying a stack of papers. I have the final reports from our attorneys. Christopher accepted the documents, scanning the legal language that formalized the end of his family. Divorce finalized. Custody terminated. Property divided according to the prenuptial agreement's adultery clauses. Ashley had signed everything without contest, probably on the advice of lawyers who understood how badly she had miscalculated. There's one more thing, Francisca said hesitantly. Mrs. Graham, the former Mrs. Graham, has been calling the office. She's asking to speak with you. What does she want? She says she has information about Mr. Travis that you need to know. Something about his plans for revenge. Christopher almost smiled. Even in defeat, Ashley was trying to manipulate him, to position herself as valuable or necessary. Tell her I'm not interested in anything she has to say. Yes, sir. And the children? What about them? They've been calling as well. Brandon left several voicemails. He's quite distressed. Christopher walked to his window, looking out at the winter landscape of his property. Snow covered the gardens where he had taught his children to build snowmen, the driveway where he had helped Brandon learn to drive, the swing set where Rachel had spent countless hours dreaming of her future. Delete the messages, he said quietly. All of them. Sir, are you sure? They're very young, and… Francisca. Christopher's voice carried a warning that stopped her mid-sentence. They made their choice. Now they have to live with it. That afternoon, Christopher drove to Martin's house for their weekly strategy meeting. The routine had become necessary. Without the anchor of family obligations, Christopher found himself adrift in a life that suddenly had no purpose beyond business success. You look like hell, Martin said, opening the door. I feel efficient, Christopher replied, brushing past his brother into the living room. Everything is exactly as it should be. Martin studied Christopher's face with concern. When's the last time you slept more than 4 hours? Sleep is for people who have things to dream about. Christopher, you won. You destroyed everyone who betrayed you. You protected your business. You made them all pay for what they did. Maybe it's time to think about rebuilding rather than just punishing. Christopher sank into Martin's leather chair, the same chair where he had first learned of his family's betrayal. Rebuilding what? My marriage to a woman who was plotting my destruction? My relationship with children who chose my enemy over their father. Maybe not those relationships, but you could build new ones. You're 42 years old, successful, intelligent. You could have any kind of life you want. I had the life I wanted, Christopher said quietly. It was an illusion, but it was what I wanted. Now I have clarity instead of happiness. It's a fair trade. Martin poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed one to Christopher. There's something we need to discuss. About Andre Travis. Christopher looked up sharply. What about him? Our Seattle contacts have been monitoring his situation. He's not just rolling over and accepting defeat. He's been making phone calls, reaching out to some very dangerous people. What kind of people? The kind who solve business problems through violence rather than litigation. Andre's family connections include some people who operate outside the normal legal framework. Christopher felt a familiar cold settling in his chest, the feeling he got when faced with a new threat to assess and neutralize. Details. Andre's been painting himself as the victim of a corporate conspiracy. He's telling people that you destroyed his business through illegal means, that you have information that could bring down his family's political connections. He's suggesting that eliminating you would solve multiple problems. Has he made any direct threats? Nothing we can prove in court. But he's been asking a lot of questions about your security arrangements, your daily routines, your vulnerabilities. Christopher smiled, and Martin recognized the expression that had terrified Christopher's business competitors for 2 decades. Good, Christopher said. I was wondering when he'd escalate to something interesting. This isn't a business negotiation, Christopher. These people don't play by rules. They don't care about evidence or legal consequences. Neither do I. Martin set down his whiskey glass. What are you thinking? Christopher stood and walked to Martin's window, looking out at the Chicago street where he had grown up, where he had learned that survival required strength and victory required ruthlessness. I'm thinking that Andre Travis still doesn't understand who he's dealing with. He's approaching this like a business problem. Hire some muscle, eliminate the obstacle, move on with his life. But this isn't business anymore, Martin. This is personal. What do you want me to do? Christopher turned back to his brother, his expression calm and deadly. I want you to send Andre a message. I want you to make it clear that if he continues down this path, I won't just destroy his business empire. I'll destroy everything he's ever cared about. How do you want to send that message? Christopher's smile was cold and final. Directly. 3 days later, Andre Travis received a package at his Seattle hotel room. Inside was a single photograph. Andre's elderly mother leaving her grocery store in Bellevue, completely unaware that she was being photographed. On the back of the photo, someone had written in neat block letters, "Some games have no winners." Andre called Christopher's office within an hour of receiving the package. You son of a bitch. Andre's voice was shaking with rage. If you touch my mother, I won't need to touch your mother, Christopher replied calmly. Just like I won't need to touch your sister in Portland, or your nephew in San Francisco, or any of the other people you care about. Do you know why, Andre? Silence on the other end of the line. Because you're going to stop making phone calls to dangerous people. You're going to accept that you lost this war, and you're going to disappear quietly into whatever life you can build from the wreckage I've left you. You can't threaten. I'm not threatening anything. I'm explaining reality. You declared war on my family, and I destroyed you. If you escalate this to violence, I'll escalate my response accordingly. The choice is yours. Christopher hung up and turned to Martin, who had been listening from across the room. Think he'll get the message? Martin nodded slowly. But are you really willing to follow through if he doesn't? Christopher was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the city he had conquered through will and ruthlessness and absolute commitment to victory. Martin, 6 months ago, I thought I was a family man who happened to be good at business. Then I discovered that my family was my enemy, and that everything I believed about my life was a lie. Do you really think I have any lines left that I won't cross? Martin had no answer for that, because they both knew the truth. Christopher Graham had become something new in the wreckage of his betrayal. Something harder and colder and infinitely more dangerous than the man who had once coached Little League and never missed a school play. That night, Christopher stood alone in his empty house, surrounded by the ghosts of a family that had never really existed. Tomorrow, he would continue building his empire. He would make more money, gain more power, win more battles in the endless war of business and ambition. But he would do it alone, without the burden of trust or the weakness of love. He would do it as a man who had learned the most valuable lesson life could teach, that in the end, you could only rely on yourself, and that mercy was a luxury only the foolish could afford. In Seattle, Andre Travis stared at the photograph of his mother and made his own calculations about power and survival and the price of continued defiance. And in Phoenix, two teenagers cried themselves to sleep in their grandmother's house, learning that some mistakes followed you forever and that some fathers never forgave their children for choosing the wrong side in a war they had been too young to understand. Chapter 7. The Shadow of Consequences. Spring arrived in Chicago with the reluctant warmth that followed every bitter winter, but Christopher Graham felt no renewal in the changing season. 3 months had passed since Christmas Eve, and his life had settled into a routine of absolute efficiency. Graham Industries was more profitable than ever. His personal wealth had grown substantially, and his reputation as a ruthless but brilliant businessman had reached legendary status. He was also completely alone. Christopher sat in his office on the 47th floor, reviewing quarterly reports that confirmed his company's dominance in the Chicago market. Every metric pointed upward: revenue, profit margins, market share, employee retention. Success, without the complications of personal relationships, had proven remarkably straightforward. His assistant, Francisca, knocked and entered with the day's correspondence. "Mr. Graham, there are several items that require your attention." Christopher accepted the stack of papers, noting the familiar efficiency with which Francisca had organized everything by priority and urgency. She had worked for him for 8 years and understood his preferences better than his former wife ever had. "The Henderson project broke ground yesterday," Francisca reported. "The mayor's office wants to schedule a photo opportunity for next week." "Decline. Send our public relations department." Mr. Wallace Martin from the Tribune called again about the interview request. "He's persistent." Christopher paused in his reading. Wallace Martin was Chicago's most respected business journalist, and an interview with him would be valuable for the company's public image. "What does he want to discuss?" "Your business philosophy, the company's expansion plans, and—" Francisca hesitated. "Your recent personal changes." Christopher's jaw tightened. His divorce and estrangement from his children had been handled as quietly as possible, but Chicago's business community was small and gossip traveled quickly. "Declined. There's also this." Francisca placed a handwritten letter on his desk, separate from the other correspondence. "It was delivered by courier this morning." Christopher recognized the handwriting immediately. Brandon's careful script, taught by expensive private schools and refined through years of thank you notes and birthday cards. His son's return address showed a Phoenix zip code. "Sir." Francisca was watching his face carefully. "Should I?" "Leave it," Christopher said quietly. "Close the door behind you." When he was alone, Christopher stared at the letter for several minutes before opening it. Brandon's words were carefully chosen, formal in the way of someone trying to sound older than 16. "Dear Dad, I know you said no contact, but I had to try one more time. I've been seeing a counselor here in Phoenix, and she's helped me understand what we did to you. I know now that Mom and Mr. Travis manipulated us, but I also know that doesn't excuse our choices. I think about you every day, about the things you taught me, the time we spent together, the plans we made for my future. I know I threw all of that away, and I know you can never forgive me. But I wanted you to know that I understand why. I'm not asking for another chance. I'm not asking you to change your mind about the inheritance or the trust funds or any of the consequences you set up. I just wanted you to know that I learned from this, that I'll never again choose the easy path over the loyal one. I hope you're happy, Dad. I hope you find people who deserve your love and protect it better than we did. Your son, Brandon *. Christopher read the letter 3 times, then placed it in his desk drawer next to similar letters from Rachel and 2 from Ashley. He wouldn't answer Brandon's letter, just as he hadn't answered the others. But he wouldn't destroy it either. His phone buzzed with a text from Martin. "Need to meet. Andre's situation has evolved." Christopher grabbed his coat and drove to Martin's office at Graham Industries security headquarters. The building was one of Christopher's first major projects, designed to house the sophisticated surveillance and protection systems that safeguarded his business empire. Now it served as the nerve center for monitoring threats to his personal safety. "What's the evolution?" Christopher asked, settling into a chair across from Martin's desk. Martin activated a large wall display showing a map of the Pacific Northwest. Andre Travis is dead. Christopher felt no surprise, only a mild curiosity about the details. How? Car accident on I-5 near Tacoma. Lost control in a rainstorm, went off an overpass. The investigating officers found empty whiskey bottles in the car. Suicide. That's the assumption. Andre had been drinking heavily since Christmas, according to our Seattle contacts. His business empire collapsed completely last month. Bankruptcy, foreclosure, criminal investigation for fraud. His family cut off all support after the scandal broke. Christopher nodded slowly. Any indication that he was still pursuing the violent option? None. The dangerous contacts I told you about dropped him as soon as his money ran out. Professional muscle doesn't work for free, and Andre had nothing left to offer them. So he chose the permanent solution. Martin studied his brother's face carefully. How do you feel about it? Christopher considered the question seriously. 3 months ago, he would have felt satisfaction at his enemy's destruction, perhaps tempered by regret for a life wasted. Now he felt only a mild disappointment that Andre's story had ended so predictably. I feel nothing, Christopher said honestly. Andre Travis made his choices, and they led him to a bridge in the rain with a bottle of whiskey. His death changes nothing for me. It closes that chapter, at least. You don't have to worry about retaliation anymore. I wasn't worried about retaliation. I was prepared for it. Martin leaned back in his chair, studying Christopher with the concern of a brother who had watched his sibling transform into someone unrecognizable. Christopher, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Go ahead. Are you happy? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Christopher walked to the window, looking down at the Chicago streets where he had built his empire through determination and ruthlessness. Happiness is for people who have things to lose, Christopher replied. I'm efficient. I'm successful. I'm invulnerable. Those are better than happy. Are they? Christopher turned back to face his brother. Yes. Happiness requires trust, and trust creates vulnerability. I trusted my wife, and she betrayed me. I trusted my children, and they chose my enemy over their father. I loved them completely, and they used that love as a weapon against me. So you'll never trust anyone again? I trust you, but only because you've proven your loyalty through decades of shared experience. Everyone else will have to earn trust through actions, not words. Martin was quiet for a moment, then asked, what about rebuilding? What about finding new people to care about? Christopher smiled, but the expression held no warmth. Martin, I had 15 years to build a family with people I chose, people I loved from the moment they were born or married. And they betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. What makes you think I could trust strangers to do better? Because not everyone is Ashley and Andre. Not every relationship is a business transaction or a power struggle, isn't it? Christopher returned to his chair, his voice taking on the analytical tone he used for board meetings. Think about every relationship you've ever had, Martin. What did you give, and what did you receive? What were the terms of the exchange? How did power and resources and vulnerability factor into the dynamic? Martin started to protest, then stopped as he considered Christopher's words. His own marriage had ended 5 years ago when his wife decided that a security executive's lifestyle was too stressful and unpredictable. His current relationship was with a woman who appreciated his financial stability as much as his personality. You're talking about love like it's a business contract, Martin said finally. All relationships are contracts, Christopher replied. The only question is whether the terms are explicit or hidden. Ashley and I had a marriage contract. I provided security and status. She provided companionship and family. The terms seemed clear until I discovered she was negotiating a better deal with Andre. Christopher stood and walked toward the door, then paused. The difference now is that I understand the game. I won't be surprised again by people acting in their own self-interest. Over the following weeks, Christopher's new worldview was tested repeatedly. Social invitations arrived from Chicago's business elite. Dinner parties, charity galas, cultural events where successful men were expected to appear with appropriate companions. Christopher attended alone, politely deflecting suggestions that various wealthy widows or accomplished divorcees would make suitable partners. You can't stay alone forever, said Rich Johnston during a construction industry luncheon. You're young, successful, available. Half the women in Chicago would marry you tomorrow. For my money or my status, Christopher replied, cutting his steak with surgical precision. Neither of those seems like a foundation for trust. Come on, Christopher. Not every woman is like Ashley. Christopher looked up from his plate, meeting Rich's eyes directly. How would I tell the difference? Ashley convinced me she loved me for 15 years. She was talented enough to bear my children, manage my household, and support my career while secretly planning my destruction. If I couldn't detect that level of deception in someone I lived with daily, how could I trust my judgment with strangers? Rich had no answer for that, because the logic was unassailable. Christopher Graham had been betrayed by people who knew him intimately, who had access to his vulnerabilities and resources. Any new relationship would start with the fundamental problem of Christopher's knowledge that love could be performance and loyalty could be strategic. The conversation was interrupted by Christopher's phone buzzing with an emergency alert from Martin. Christopher excused himself and stepped outside to take the call. "We have a problem," Martin said without preamble. "Ashley has been arrested." Christopher felt a familiar coldness settle in his chest. For what? Fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit corporate espionage. The FBI raided her apartment this morning. They're saying she was running a scheme to steal and sell business intelligence from multiple companies, not just yours. Christopher absorbed this information with the detachment of a man reviewing quarterly projections. How extensive? From what I can gather, Ashley had been using her social connections to gather inside information from other executives' wives and families. She and Andre weren't just targeting you. They were running a full-scale intelligence operation. And now that Andre's dead, she's facing the consequences alone. It gets worse. The investigators think the scheme goes back years, possibly to before she met you. There's evidence that Ashley specifically targeted you because of your wealth and business connections. Christopher was quiet for a long moment, processing the revelation that his entire marriage might have been a 15-year confidence game. What does this mean for the children? They're being investigated as potential accomplices. Brandon and Rachel's cooperation with the scheme might have been more extensive than we realized. Christopher hung up and stood on the sidewalk outside the restaurant, watching Chicago's business district bustle with the energy of ambition and competition. Somewhere in the federal building downtown, his former wife was learning that criminal conspiracy had consequences beyond divorce court. Somewhere in Phoenix, his children were discovering that their betrayal of their father might follow them into adulthood in ways they had never imagined. He felt no satisfaction in their downfall, no vindication of his harsh response to their betrayal. He felt only the confirmation of lessons he had already learned. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Family was an illusion that dissolved under pressure, and the only reliable relationship was the one he had with his own ambition. Christopher returned to the restaurant, where Rich Johnston was waiting with concerned questions about the emergency call. "Everything all right?" "Everything is exactly as it should be," Christopher replied, returning to his lunch with the calm efficiency of a man who had stopped being surprised by human nature. Chapter 8. The Architecture of Solitude. 6 months after Andre Travis's death, Christopher Graham had perfected the art of living without emotional attachment. His days followed a precise routine that maximized productivity while minimizing opportunities for the complications that came with personal relationships. He woke at 5 a.m., exercised in his private gym, reviewed overnight reports from his global operations, and arrived at the office by 7 a.m. to begin another day of expanding his empire. The federal investigation into Ashley's intelligence operation had concluded with her conviction on multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy. She was serving a 5-year sentence in a minimum security facility outside Chicago, where her fellow inmates presumably appreciated her explanations of corporate governance and financial planning. Brandon and Rachel had avoided criminal charges due to their ages, but their involvement in the scheme had been documented thoroughly enough to ensure that their betrayal would follow them forever. Christopher learned these details from Martin's weekly security briefings, treating them as information rather than emotional events. His former family had become data points in files that he reviewed with the same detachment he brought to market analysis and competitor intelligence. "The children have been asking about you," Martin reported during one of their morning meetings. "Their grandmother called my office yesterday." Christopher didn't look up from the financial projections he was reviewing. "What did you tell her?" "That you'd made your position clear and that it wouldn't be changing." "Good. Anything else?" Martin hesitated, a sure sign that he was about to venture into territory Christopher preferred to avoid. Christopher, they're 17 and 15 now. In a few years, they'll be adults trying to build their own lives. Maybe. Martin. Christopher's voice carried the quiet authority that ended arguments in boardrooms across Chicago. We've discussed this. My decision regarding Brandon and Rachel was final. But they were children when this happened. They were manipulated. They were old enough to understand right and wrong. They were old enough to choose loyalty over betrayal. They chose differently. Christopher finally looked up from his papers, meeting his brother's eyes directly. Some decisions are permanent, Martin. Some relationships can't be repaired. Martin nodded reluctantly and moved on to other security matters, but Christopher could see the concern in his brother's face. Martin still believed in redemption and second chances, concepts that Christopher had discarded along with his faith in family loyalty. That afternoon, Christopher attended the groundbreaking ceremony for the Mitchell Tower, a $300 million mixed-use development that would be the crown jewel of his real estate portfolio. As he posed for photographs with the mayor and other dignitaries, Christopher noted the careful distance maintained by the other attendees' families. Wives and children smiled for the cameras, but kept their interactions with Christopher polite and brief, as if betrayal might be contagious. "Magnificent project," said Timothy Ramirez, a city councilman whose support had been crucial for the development's approval. "Your company continues to set the standard for excellence in Chicago." "We appreciate the city's partnership," Christopher replied, his standard response to political flattery. "I hope you'll consider joining us for the Chamber of Commerce dinner next month. It would be an honor to have you at our table." Christopher recognized the invitation for what it was, an opportunity for Timothy to associate himself with Christopher's success while providing Christopher with access to political influence. A fair exchange of mutual benefit. "I'll have my assistant coordinate with your office," Christopher agreed. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd dispersed, Christopher noticed a familiar figure standing at the edge of the construction site. Rachel, now 15 and taller than he remembered, watched him from behind the safety barrier with the careful intensity of someone trying to memorize a face she might never see again. Christopher felt no impulse to approach her, no surge of paternal affection or concern for her well-being. She was simply a young woman who resembled someone he had once loved, before he learned that love was a vulnerability his enemies could exploit. Rachel seemed to sense his gaze and raised her hand in a tentative wave. Christopher nodded once in acknowledgement, then turned and walked toward his waiting car without looking back. That evening, Christopher reviewed the day's communications in his home office, the same room where his family's betrayal had been planned and executed. He had considered redecorating the space, but decided that the memories served a useful purpose. They reminded him why emotional attachment was a luxury he couldn't afford. His phone rang at exactly 8 p.m., the daily call from Martin that had become their routine for sharing sensitive information that couldn't be discussed over corporate communications. "How did the ceremony go?" Martin asked. "Productive." The mayor confirmed his support for the waterfront project. "I saw the news coverage. Good photographs." Christopher sensed that Martin was building towards something uncomfortable. "What aren't you telling me?" "Rachel was there. I had someone monitoring the event for security purposes, and she was observed watching you from the crowd." "I saw her. Did you speak with her?" "No." "Was there a security concern?" Martin sighed audibly. "Christopher, she's your daughter. She traveled downtown by herself just to see you from a distance. Doesn't that affect you at all?" Christopher walked to his window, looking out at the Chicago skyline he had helped build through determination and ruthless focus. Each light represented success achieved without the complications of trust or emotional vulnerability. "She was my daughter," Christopher corrected. "Now she's someone who chose to betray me when given the opportunity. The fact that she regrets that choice doesn't change the fundamental equation. She was 14 years old enough to understand loyalty, old enough to choose sides in a conflict she helped create." Christopher's voice remained calm, but Martin could hear the finality in it. "Martin, I rebuilt my entire life around the understanding that people act in their own self-interest. Rachel acted in hers when she chose to help Andre and Ashley. I'm acting in mine by ensuring that betrayal has permanent consequences. And if you're wrong, if you're throwing away relationships that could be salvaged?" Christopher smiled, though Martin couldn't see it through the phone. "I'm not wrong about human nature, Martin. I was wrong about my family, but that was because I allowed sentiment to cloud my judgment. I won't make that mistake again. The conversation ended with Martin's reluctant acceptance of Christopher's position, but Christopher could hear his brother's disapproval. Martin still believed in forgiveness and healing, concepts that Christopher had concluded were luxuries for people who didn't understand the true cost of betrayal. Over the following weeks, Christopher's social calendar filled with business obligations that required his presence at various Chicago society events. He attended alone, as had become his practice, maintaining polite conversation with associates while deflecting personal questions with the skill of a man who had learned to protect his vulnerabilities. At a charity auction for the Children's Hospital, Christopher found himself seated next to Carol Klein, a prominent attorney whose husband had died in a skiing accident the previous year. Carol was intelligent, accomplished, and appropriately wealthy. Exactly the kind of woman who might appeal to a successful businessman seeking a suitable companion. "I understand you're in real estate development," Carol said during dinner, her conversation natural and engaging. "Commercial and residential projects, primarily in the Chicago area. It must be fascinating work, creating something permanent, something that outlasts the individual effort." Christopher noted the philosophical undertone of her comment, the suggestion that legacy and permanence mattered. "Most buildings last longer than the people who design them," he agreed. "Do you have family involved in the business?" The question was innocuous enough, the kind of social inquiry that normally led to discussions of children's education and career plans. Christopher's response ended that line of conversation immediately. "No family involvement. I prefer to keep business and personal relationships separate." Carol's slight hesitation told Christopher that she had heard rumors about his divorce and estrangement from his children. Her next comment confirmed it. Sometimes separation is necessary for everyone's well-being. Christopher recognized the diplomatic phrasing of someone who had been briefed on his situation. Exactly. The conversation moved on to safer topics: the hospital charity, recent developments in Chicago's legal community, shared acquaintances in the city's professional circles. Carol was charming and intelligent, and under different circumstances, Christopher might have been interested in pursuing a relationship with her. But circumstances had taught him that charm could be performance and intelligence could be weaponized. Carol Klein might be exactly what she appeared to be, or she might be another Ashley Graham, skilled enough to maintain a convincing facade for years while serving her own agenda. Christopher had no interest in discovering which possibility was true. As the evening concluded and guests began departing, Carol made a subtle overture toward future contact. "I hope we'll have the opportunity to continue our conversation soon. I'm sure we'll encounter each other at future events," Christopher replied politely, a response that acknowledged her interest while declining to pursue it. Christopher drove home through Chicago's nighttime streets, past buildings he had constructed and developments he had financed, monuments to success achieved through focus and determination uncompromised by emotional complications. His house awaited him, perfectly maintained and efficiently organized, a sanctuary designed for a man who had learned that solitude was safer than trust. In his study, Christopher reviewed the day's messages and reports, noting the steady growth of his business empire and the continuing expansion of his influence in Chicago's development community. Every metric pointed toward continued success, professional satisfaction, and personal security. He felt no loneliness in his solitude, no regret for the relationships he had chosen to end. He felt only the cold satisfaction of a man who had learned life's most important lesson, that in the end, you could only rely on yourself, and that the price of trust was vulnerability he could no longer afford to pay. Outside his window, Chicago slept under the glow of lights from buildings that would outlast the people who had built them, monuments to ambition uncompromised by the weakness of love. Chapter 9. The Final Reckoning. 2 years after the collapse of his family, Christopher Graham stood at the pinnacle of Chicago's business community, his empire spanning construction, real estate, and development projects that had reshaped the city's skyline. At 44, he commanded respect, wielded influence, and accumulated wealth at a pace that impressed even his most successful competitors. He was also the loneliest man in Illinois. The morning of March 15th brought news that would test the foundations of the new life Christopher had built from the wreckage of betrayal. Martin called before dawn with information that changed everything. "Ashley is dead," Martin said without preamble. Christopher set down his coffee cup and walked to his kitchen window, looking out at the grounds of the estate that had once housed a family. Details: prison medical facility. Apparent suicide. She was found in her cell this morning with a note. Christopher felt nothing at the news of his former wife's death. No sadness, no satisfaction, no sense of closure. Ashley had become a stranger to him long before her death, just another casualty of choices that had led inevitably to their conclusions. What did the note say? Martin's voice carried an unusual tension. It's addressed to you. The prison authorities want to know if you'll accept delivery. Bring it to my office this afternoon. Christopher hung up and continued his morning routine with the mechanical precision that had characterized his life since Christmas Eve 2 years ago. Exercise, shower, breakfast, review of overnight reports from his international operations. The news of Ashley's death was simply another piece of information to be processed and filed away. At 2 p.m., Martin arrived at Christopher's office with a sealed envelope bearing Ashley's handwriting. Christopher recognized the script from 15 years of birthday cards, love notes, and household lists, the everyday intimacy of a marriage that had been revealed as an elaborate deception. Are you sure you want to read this? Martin asked. Christopher opened the envelope without hesitation. Ashley's final letter was 3 pages long, written in the careful handwriting of someone who had time to choose each word deliberately. Asterisk Christopher, by the time you read this, I'll be beyond the reach of consequences. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. We both know that's impossible. I'm writing to give you something you've never had. The complete truth about our marriage and what led to its destruction. You were right about almost everything. I did target you deliberately when we met. I did research your background, your vulnerabilities, your desires before our first conversation. I did plan our entire relationship as a means to access your wealth and status. But you were wrong about one crucial thing. I did love you. Not at first. At first, you were just a mark, a successful man whose trust one could exploit. But somewhere during our second year of marriage, something changed. I fell in love with the man I was deceiving. For 13 years, I lived with the contradiction of genuinely loving someone while betraying them. I gave you children I wanted you to have. I supported your career because I wanted you to succeed. I built a home with you because I wanted us to be happy. When Andre approached me, I should have told you immediately. I should have ended the game I'd been playing and trusted you with the truth. Instead, I made the calculation that I could use Andre to secure our family's future while protecting the secret of how our marriage began. I convinced myself that you would never need to know about Andre, just like you never needed to know about my original intentions. I thought I could manage both relationships without destroying what we had built together. I was wrong about everything. The children never knew about my original deception. Brandon and Rachel believed they were helping their mother navigate a difficult situation with a family friend. They thought they were protecting you from business stress, not betraying you to an enemy. I manipulated them just as thoroughly as I manipulated you. I know this doesn't change anything. I know you'll never forgive us, and I understand why. Trust, once broken, can never be rebuilt. But I wanted you to know that their betrayal came from love, not malice. They believed they were saving their father, not destroying him. You asked me once why I threw away 15 years of marriage. The answer is that I didn't know how to be honest about who I was when we met. By the time I loved you enough to want to tell the truth, too much time had passed, and too many lies had been told. The foundation of our marriage was rotten, and eventually, that rot destroyed everything built on top of it. I don't expect this letter to change your mind about anything. I just wanted you to understand that love and betrayal can coexist, that people can make terrible choices while meaning well, and that consequences don't always match intentions. You're a good man, Christopher. You deserve better than what I gave you. I hope someday you'll find someone who can love you without deception, someone who doesn't carry the weight of lies that make honesty impossible. Tell the children I'm sorry. Tell them their mother loved them enough to remove herself from their lives rather than continue damaging them with her presence. Ashley asterisk. Christopher read the letter twice, then set it on his desk and walked to his window. Chicago stretched out below him, a city he had conquered through determination and ruthless focus, a domain built on the ruins of trust. What are you thinking? Martin asked. Christopher was quiet for several minutes, processing Ashley's final revelation. The marriage that had defined half his life had been built on deception from its very first moment. The woman he had loved completely had been a professional manipulator who had eventually developed genuine feelings for her target. "I'm thinking," Christopher said finally, "that Ashley was right about one thing. Trust, once broken, can never be rebuilt." "And the children? Knowing that they thought they were protecting you rather than betraying you. Does that change anything?" Christopher turned away from the window and faced his brother. "No. Brandon and Rachel still chose to deceive me when given the opportunity. The fact that they were manipulated doesn't change the fundamental reality that they were willing to work against their father when they believed it served their interests. They were children, Christopher. Children who trusted their mother's judgment about what was best for the family. They were old enough to understand loyalty, old enough to come to me directly with their concerns instead of working behind my back with strangers." Christopher's voice remained calm, but Martin could hear the finality in it. Their intentions don't erase their choices. Martin studied his brother's face, searching for some sign of softening, some indication that Ashley's letter had created an opening for reconciliation. He found only the cold determination that had characterized Christopher since Christmas Eve 2 years ago. What about Ashley's suggestion that they be told she loved them? Christopher picked up Ashley's letter and fed it into his document shredder, watching the pages disappear into neat strips of meaningless paper. "Ashley forfeited the right to send messages to my children when she chose to use them as weapons against me. Her love, real or imagined, doesn't matter anymore." That afternoon, Christopher attended the funeral of Harold Bridges, a construction industry colleague who had died of a heart attack at 58. The service was held at St. Michael's Cathedral, where Christopher had once planned to attend his children's confirmations and his silver wedding anniversary. As he sat in the pew listening to eulogies about Harold's devotion to family and community, Christopher noted the assembled crowd of Harold's relatives, friends, and business associates. Children and grandchildren wept openly, while colleagues shared stories of Harold's loyalty and generosity. Christopher observed this display of affection with the detachment of an anthropologist studying tribal rituals. These people genuinely mourned Harold's death because they had trusted him and been trusted in return. Their grief was real because their relationships had been authentic. Christopher envied them their capacity for trust, but he no longer possessed it himself. Betrayal had burned that ability out of him as completely as a fire consumes a forest, leaving behind only the clarity of absolute self-reliance. After the service, Christopher was approached by Kent Sanderson, Harold's longtime business partner and Christopher's occasional collaborator on municipal projects. "Terrible loss," Kent said, shaking Christopher's hand. "Harold was one of the last honest men in this business." "He was a good partner," Christopher agreed. "You know, Harold always said you reminded him of himself at your age. Driven, successful, but still connected to what really matters." Kent paused, studying Christopher's face. "He worried that you were isolating yourself too much after your divorce." Christopher felt no annoyance at Kent's presumption, only mild curiosity about Harold's concern for someone he had known primarily through business dealings. "Isolation has advantages," Christopher replied. "No complications, no divided loyalties, no unexpected betrayals." Kent's expression grew serious. "It also has costs. Harold used to say that success without someone to share it with is just expensive loneliness. Harold had a family he could trust. That changes the calculation considerably. Trust can be rebuilt, Christopher. Not with the same people, necessarily, but with new ones who earn it honestly." Christopher thanked Kent for his concern and made polite excuses to leave early. As he drove home through Chicago's evening traffic, Christopher considered Kent's words about rebuilding trust and Harold's supposed concern for his isolation. The advice was well-meaning, but impractical. Christopher had spent 2 years constructing a life that protected him from the vulnerabilities that had nearly destroyed him. He had built walls that kept out betrayal, deception, and the kind of emotional manipulation that had characterized his marriage. Those same walls also kept out love, companionship, and the possibility of genuine human connection. Christopher understood the trade-off and had decided it was worth making. That night, Christopher sat in his home office reviewing financial reports that confirmed his continued success. Graham Industries had grown by 30% since his divorce, his personal wealth had doubled, and his influence in Chicago's business community had reached levels that would have been unimaginable when he was focused on family obligations. He had achieved everything a businessman could want. wealth, power, respect, and complete freedom from personal complications that might compromise his judgment or create vulnerabilities for his enemies to exploit. At 11 p.m., Christopher's secure line rang with a call from his head of security. "Sir, we have a situation at the front gate." Christopher walked to his security monitor, where he could see a young woman standing in the rain outside his property's entrance. Even through the distortion of the camera and the darkness of the night, he recognized Rachel immediately. "How long has she been there?" Christopher asked. "About 20 minutes. She's just standing there, not trying to enter or make contact." "Should we approach her?" Christopher watched his daughter, the little girl he had once pushed on swings and taught to ride a bicycle, standing alone in the rain outside the gates of the home where she had once lived. She was 17 now, nearly an adult, trying to find the courage to approach a father who had made it clear that she was no longer welcome in his life. "Sir?" the security officer prompted. Christopher felt no urge to go to her, no paternal instinct to bring her inside out of the rain. He felt only the cold recognition that some distances couldn't be bridged and some relationships couldn't be repaired. "She's not a security threat," Christopher said quietly. "Let her stand there as long as she wants. But don't let her onto the property." Christopher turned off the monitor and walked to his bedroom, where he prepared for sleep with the same methodical routine that had organized his life since he learned that family was an illusion and trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Outside in the rain, Rachel Graham stood at the gates of her childhood home, trying to find the words for an apology that would never be accepted and hoping for forgiveness from a father who had taught her that some betrayals were permanent. At midnight, she finally gave up and walked away, leaving Christopher Graham alone in the empire he had built from the ashes of love, surrounded by success that no one could take from him and protected by walls that no one could breach. He had won every war that mattered and destroyed every enemy who had dared to challenge him. He had achieved the ultimate victory, a life where betrayal was impossible because trust no longer existed. In the darkness of his empty house, Christopher Graham slept the dreamless sleep of a man who had learned life's most brutal lesson and chosen survival over hope, power over love, and the cold certainty of solitude over the dangerous vulnerability of letting anyone close enough to hurt him again. In the end, Christopher Graham had everything he thought he wanted: wealth beyond measure, power without limit, and complete protection from the possibility of betrayal. He had taught his enemies that some lines should never be crossed and some wars could never be won against him. But in his ruthless pursuit of invulnerability, he had also destroyed every possibility of joy, love, and human connection. He had won the war against betrayal by eliminating the very relationships that make victory meaningful. Christopher Graham became exactly what his enemies had failed to make him, a man with nothing left to lose. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.